From their unique workout outfits to drinking bodily fluids, today we look at crazy stuff the ancient Greeks did. Number 13. Apple of my eye. There have been some really strange ways that people have expressed their love for each other, but the Greeks nailed it with the weird tradition of throwing an apple at the person you wanted to marry. If the person you wanted to marry caught the apple, this would mean that they accepted your proposal. The sources don't say how hard they threw the apple, but it's fun to picture an ancient Greek chucking the apple as hard as they can, giving the phrase, "think fast," new meaning. This tradition stems from the belief that apples were sacred to the goddess Aphrodite, as she was awarded a golden one when Paris of Troy chose her as the most beautiful of all goddesses, which he only did because she promised him Helen of Troy, inevitably starting the Trojan War. Because Aphrodite was the goddess of love, apples became a large part of Greek romantic tradition. Aside from proposals, it was common for newlyweds to eat apples on their wedding night, and people gave apples to each other as an ancient type of Valentine. Number 12. Political exile. In a practice which we still wish was used today, if the ancient Athenians thought anyone, especially politicians, were doing a terrible job or were considered politically or socially dangerous to the city, the citizens were allowed to take a vote on whether or not the person should be exiled. This practice was known as ostracismos, which is the origin of the English word ostracize. If the person received 6,000 votes, they would be banished from Athens for 10 years, and if they attempted to return, they would be executed. However, on some occasions, after a few years, they could be voted back in, which happened a few times when the city needed the person. Number 11. Naked crunch. Many of us have felt the fear of changing before gym class or being self-conscious of our bodies. But if you lived in ancient Greece, you would have been considered very silly for having these fears. In fact, the ancient Greeks didn't even bother to change into work clothes. They just worked out in the buff and saved the laundry. It may surprise you to find out that the word gymnasium actually comes from the practice of working out naked. The Greek origin word of gymnasium literally means naked exercise. There are a few other good reasons they did this other than just being comfortable in their own skin. Because it is easier to move around without sweaty clothes holding you back. If you exercise outside, your body soaks up nutrients from the sun and gives you more energy. And the Greeks believed that the human body was a gift from the gods and did this to pay tribute to them. If these reasons have you considering going full Monty for your next workout, please do it at home and shut the blinds, because we don't want to see modern society warming up to this ancient custom in the near future. Number 10. Tax shaming. In order for a democracy to function properly, you would think that strict rules on taxation would have to be enforced so that the rich wouldn't take advantage. But in ancient Greece, this was far from the case. The Greeks practiced self-policing in many ways, and the idea of paying your own fair share for the greater good was no different. Yes, there were rich and there were poor, but the Greeks had an ingrained understanding that in order for society as a whole to improve, everyone had to make sacrifices. For those blessed by the gods with wealth, it was only natural to give back. For the most part, in modern society, this is something that must be forced on people via law. Otherwise, there would never be funding for public works or necessary governmental institutions. To get the rich to pony up, all the Greeks had to do was to accuse someone of being frugal in their donations. This was a rare occurrence because in ancient Greece, the way to really brag about one's wealth was to give the biggest donation. It was also embedded in their culture that most riches were accrued via luck. So there's no inherent shame in being financially less fortunate. Number 9. Pottery training. If you've never given thanks to the man who invented toilet paper, you will after this one. In ancient Greece, they had no luxuries such as Charmin Ultra Soft. All they had were pieces of ceramic called pessoi. These ancient wiping tools may have started out as just a broken piece of pottery, but then, thankfully for the sake of progress, were specifically designed and smoothed for bathroom usage. Some sources even cite the ancient Greeks as writing the names of their enemies on their pessoi, kind of like having the face of a despised politician on toilet paper today. Number 8. Special sweat. Athletes in the ancient Olympics were often praised as more than just mere mortals, but some of the ways that they were revered were quite peculiar, even downright disgusting. For instance, if you were suffering from muscle cramps, feeling sluggish, or suffering from a wide variety of other ailments, medical practitioners at the time would commonly prescribe the sweat of athletes. After an athlete was done competing, they would be cleaned with a metal instrument called a strigil, and the sweat, dirt, oil, and skin would be collected. This gross mixture was called gloios. The gloios would then be used as a type of anointment and rubbed on the affected body parts. Some sources even say that this gloios may have been consumed by the sick. All we know is that we'd love to travel back in time and see if the ointment was counterintuitively prescribed for use after bathing. Number 7. Dermadung. Like so many ancient cultures, the lack of scientific knowledge led to some very odd medicines and medical treatments. These usually came about from people trying to find uses for the natural resources around them, and coincidentally finding results in bizarre applications. One very odd medical treatment to combat aging and promote healthy skin was the practice of bathing in mud and crocodile dung. They also used the dung as a sort of cleansing mask akin to a modern facial. While you might be thinking this is ridiculous, gross, and can't possibly have any real benefits, there is some proof in modern science that shows that certain animal excrements do contain nutrients that promote healthy skin. Crocodile feces, for example, actually does have a specific quality that helps in the removal of dead skin, though we can't see the FDA approving this cosmetic for commercial purchase. Number 6. Unibeauty. In ancient Greece, if you plucked your eyebrows, you were considered ugly. The Greeks valued the purity of the au naturel look and saw the unibrow as a sign of beauty and wisdom. Some sources say that the Greeks were even more picky about their qualifications for beautiful eyebrows and did not favor the full unibrow and instead valued eyebrows that were slightly furry in the middle but not too dark as to forge a single superbrow. Number 5. God to be named later. Everyone knows that the ancient Greeks worshipped many gods, each of whom had many different dominions that they ruled over. Among them were Zeus, god of thunder, Apollo, the sun god, and even Koalamas, the god of stupidity. As a matter of fact, the Greeks had a god for everything, and we literally mean everything. In order to hedge their bets in case something new came along that they didn't have a god for, they built altars and made sacrifices to agnostos theos, which means unknown gods. The Greek word agnostos, or unknown, is in fact where the popular current philosophy of agnosticism derives its name. It's kind of cool to think that even though things like nuclear weapons, reality television, the internet, and fidget spinners weren't even invented yet, the ancients were still praying for them or praying to stop them. Number 4. Soul beans. Pythagoras was an ancient Greek mathematician and philosopher who's probably best known for his Pythagorean theorem in geometry. He was also one of the first humans in history to openly propose that the Earth was round. But you might not know that Pythagoras was also kind of a fanatic cult leader. The religious sect called Pythagoreanism worshipped mathematics as the key to understanding everything. They also believed the soul was immortal and in transmigration, which is the idea that when someone or something dies, the soul moves into a new body. Because of this belief, Pythagoreans were not only vegetarians, but some historians say they also abstained from eating certain plants considered to contain souls, such as trees and beans. Scholars are still perplexed by why Pythagoreans were so adamant about that no bean part of the diet. Some say that it had nothing to do with souls, and more to do with a common disease at the time known as favism, a type of anemia that was thought to be caused by consumption of beans. Funny as it may be, Pythagoreans also believed that passing gas was part of the soul escaping the body, but there's no evidence to this being linked to the cult's avoidance of the gas-generating legumes. Number 3. Quick fix. The Greeks were amazing scientists and mathematicians for the time period and are given credit for inventing the watermill, alarm clock, democracy, and modern philosophies, to name a few. But we can also thank them for satiating our need for instant gratification in one of their most commonly forgotten inventions, the vending machine. Though it was simple compared to the automated snack boxes that we take for granted today, the first vending machine was a brilliant design, especially considering the fact that there was no electricity. This ancient vending machine used to dispense holy water was instead powered by a simple lever system. A person would put a coin into a slot at the top of the machine. Inside the coin's weight pushed down a lever that raised the door, holding back the water. Once the door was fully raised, the coin would slip off the lever via gravity, and the door would shut. So simple, yet so genius. The design would go on to be the basis for all vending machines until the advent of electric power. Number 2. Sense of humors. Ancient Greek doctors practiced medical evaluation techniques that revolved around what we call the 4 humors. These included blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and each related to one of the 4 classic elements and each of the seasons. They believed that these humors must be balanced for a person to be considered healthy. So it's not a stretch to think that test tasting was involved in establishing whether or not they were balanced. If a certain humor was being overproduced by the body, you would be diagnosed with having a certain temperament. If you had too much blood, you would be diagnosed as a sanguine temperament, which had the predisposition for lung, heart, or digestive problems. If you had too much phlegm, you'd be diagnosed with a phlegmatic temperament, which includes predispositions towards colds, the flu, obesity, and hyperthyroidism. If you had too much yellow bile, you'd be considered to have a choleric temperament, which was associated with conditions such as ulcers, fevers, migraines, and even gingivitis. A melancholic temperament was the result of too much black bile, and you could possibly be suffering from or will suffer conditions such as anxiety, depression, anemia, and hypoglycemia. These temperaments were not only diagnosed using the humors, but from studying a person's dreams, appearance, and personality. The doctors would lump you into one of these 4 categories. Various Western societies as recent as the 19th century acknowledge and use the 4 humors and temperaments as guidelines in medicine. Number 1. Sweet pea. What would you do if your doctor asked you to urinate in a cup and then proceed to taste it? Well, believe it or not, this is one of the many gross and perplexing ways that medicine was practiced in ancient Greece. This particular method was mainly used to diagnose diabetes. If the person's urine tasted abnormally sweet, they would be considered positive. In fact, the ancient Greeks were the first to give detailed descriptions of this disorder. And this test is somewhat backed up by modern science, though it seems obvious today that a person who has high levels of sugar in their blood would have sweet urine. This system of bodily fluid taste testing might not have been exclusive to urine, which brings us to